At 87, the woman who once slipped quietly into Paul Newman's life has finally spoken the truth he spent years trying to hide. The spotlight once turned him into Hollywood's moral icon, but the truth she carries is cold enough to crack that perfect image. And if what she revealed is only the surface, then what lies beneath may force the world to see differently the man they once worshipped. Hollywood always placed Paul Newman in the position of a perfect man. The public saw a star with bright eyes, a gentle smile, and a calm presence that could quiet any room. The press called him the standard of decency. They believed he was born to be the model every other man should strive for. That image became so familiar that no one questioned whether there might be another version of him behind it. On the red carpet, Paul always walked with ease. He held his wife's hand, said a few short lines, then smiled in front of dozens of cameras. No one saw the exhaustion in his eyes after long shooting days. No one heard the sighs when he closed the hotel door at the end of the night. Hollywood remembered only the beautiful moments, and Hollywood wanted to keep only those moments. His career looked like a film edited to perfection. Every role seemed deep. Every movie seemed successful. Paul always showed up at the right time and did exactly what the audience expected. People thought he never made mistakes, never lost his temper, never let his private life touch his work. His image looked so clean that not a single scratch seemed to slip through. Joanne Woodward, his wife, also helped build that picture. The two of them were called Hollywood's most perfect marriage. They acted together, appeared on television together, did charity work together. The public saw them as proof that love could survive under the lights, and they believed that easily because Paul always looked like the kind of man who would choose the right path in any situation. But real life does not follow neat magazine lines. There are quiet spaces the camera never records. There are times when Paul disappeared from the schedule, secret meetings arranged in a hurry, short trips with no clear reason. The studio thought he needed rest. The publicity team thought he just wanted to avoid the paparazzi. The truth, no one really knew. Paul had a kind of pull that made people want to be near him. It was not loud, it was not flashy. It was simply the feeling that he always listened, always noticed, always made the other person feel important. A light question, a brief touch, a shared smile. Small things like that sometimes hit harder than any declaration of love. To his colleagues, Paul was easy to like. To the audience, he was perfect. But those who worked close to him told a different story. They talked about the loneliness of a man trying to live up to the role the world wrote for him. They talked about nights off when Paul sat alone in the dressing room, not speaking to anyone. They talked about the way he looked into the mirror, as if searching for a part of himself he had left behind somewhere. Hollywood loves a hero story, and Paul Newman is their favorite story. But the truth is different. No matter how famous a man is, he still needs someone who sees through the image, understands him, and listens without attaching more expectations. That empty space is where temptation begins. Barbara Babcock stepped into his life right at that empty space. It was not a movie moment. There were no lights, no red carpet. Just two people trying to find a real breath in a world that kept asking them to perform. And from that moment, the perfect image everyone believed in began to crack in ways no one else could see. Barbara Babcock met Paul Newman during what seemed like an ordinary workday. No bright lights, no red carpet, just a small room and a few people getting ready for a scene. Barbara walked in, put her bag on a chair, and adjusted her hair. Paul looked up, and that moment felt like a brief pause that no one but them noticed. A short glance, but enough to tap into the quiet space Paul had carried for years. Barbara was not the type of woman who liked to draw attention. She spoke softly, carefully, and always chose her words with care. But her calmness made people want to move closer. Paul started a conversation with a few simple lines. Some talk about work. A polite question. But the conversation lasted longer than either of them expected. Nothing dramatic. Nothing forbidden. Just two people finding a small pocket of peace in a Hollywood that was too loud. In the days that followed, Paul found ways to stand nearer to Barbara. He did not explain why. Barbara did not ask. She simply felt that whenever he appeared, the air grew lighter. Paul often leaned against the doorway, hands in his pockets, watching the set and saying very few words. Barbara gave a small smile. No one knew why. No one paid attention to them. But both of them knew exactly what was starting to grow in those few steps of distance. One afternoon, Paul sat beside Barbara during a break. He set a cup of coffee next to her and said something so soft only she could hear. It had been a long time since he felt this comfortable. It was not a flirt, not a pickup line, just a truth that slipped out. Barbara looked down at her hands. She understood that the meaning of that sentence went far beyond a fleeting moment of intimacy. But this was Hollywood, and Hollywood never lets quiet moments last too long. Paul started disappearing from the crowd after filming. No one knew where he went. No one asked. But Barbara noticed that every time he vanished, he showed up in front of her a few hours later. Their talks grew longer. His sharing became more honest. Paul told her about the pressure of keeping his image spotless, how he felt like he was living inside a picture others had painted, how he sometimes wanted to disappear from every gaze. Barbara listened without judging. That was something Paul could not find anywhere else. Then the discreet meetings began. Not the loud kind of affair people imagine. Just two people meeting in quiet corners of the city. A small diner, an old parking lot, a silent stretch of hallway no one walked through. Barbara always went a few steps ahead. Paul always arrived a few minutes later. No one was allowed to see them together. No one was allowed to hear their conversations. But every secret has its own sound, no matter how soft. A young assistant once saw Paul standing outside Barbara's room at the end of the day. He did not dare ask, did not dare talk. But watching Paul walk away with that heavy look on his face, he knew something was wrong with the image Hollywood promoted every day. Barbara knew this relationship could hurt her, but she stayed. Paul knew it could destroy everything he had built over the years. But he did not stop either. They were like two people drifting on calm water, fully aware there was a whirlpool ahead, but unable to turn back. One evening, they met in a cheap rented room to avoid being followed. No lights, no decor, just one chair and one old table. Paul leaned against the wall, fingers intertwined. Barbara sat opposite. Neither of them spoke. The silence stretched until she had to reach out and gently touch his hand. Paul looked up. His eyes held both gratitude and apology. Barbara knew that moment was the line. She could no longer return to the life she had before. In the weeks that followed, Barbara became more cautious. She feared other people's eyes, feared casual questions, feared a quick photo taken at the wrong time. Paul tried to reassure her that everything was fine, but he was the one who kept checking his phone and scanning every room he entered. Tension slipped into every meeting. One day, Barbara received a handwritten letter from Paul. It was not elaborate, not poetic, just a few lines saying he wanted to keep everything safe. The letter did not mention the future. It held no promises, no declarations, only a quiet statement that he valued her in a way words could barely carry. Barbara read that letter several times. Each time, a chill ran down her spine. She knew what keeping safe meant. It meant keeping silent, keeping distance, accepting more pain so that a man with too much to lose could be protected. Barbara did not blame Paul, but the cost of silence was getting heavier every day. A close friend asked her if something was wrong. The friend noticed Barbara had changed. She spoke less, smiled less, often stared out the window, lost in thought. Barbara just shook her head. She did not dare say anything. Every word she spoke could become a blade cutting into Paul's life. Hollywood always hides parts of the truth to preserve a beautiful story. And somehow, Barbara had become part of that hiding. She walked into set as usual, put on makeup as usual, smiled as usual, but inside, she was breaking a little more each day. Paul was not doing much better. When he was home with his family, he tried to act normal, but at night, when everyone was asleep, he sat alone under the kitchen light. Joanne Woodward once asked why he looked so tired. Paul said it was work. Joanne believed him. Joanne always believed him, and Paul knew that her trust only made his guilt sink deeper. Once, Barbara decided to stop answering Paul. She wanted to end it, to go back to a normal life. But just a few days later, Paul called, his voice quiet and worn. He said he just wanted to hear her voice. Barbara realized she could not leave as easily as she thought. Their relationship went on like that. No one knew. No one was allowed to know. But both of them felt the cost clearly, every single day. Hollywood has too many secrets. But this one was not like the others. This secret was tied to a man the whole world admired. It touched a marriage millions of people saw as a symbol. It was a secret that could hurt many people. Barbara carried it for years. She kept it so long that she barely remembered the last time she truly lived without it. Paul kept it to avoid destroying the world he had promised to protect. But the truth always looks for a way out, no matter how slow. And what Paul and Barbara tried to hide was heavier than anything they had ever dared to imagine. Every secret has a moment when it can no longer stay buried. For Paul and Barbara, that moment came on a night that seemed completely ordinary. Paul had just finished a long shoot. He told the crew he wanted to take a walk to relax, but instead of heading back to the hotel, he turned down a small street behind the studio. Barbara was already there, waiting. Her arms were crossed, trying to keep herself calm. They had not seen each other in almost 2 weeks. The silence between them made it hard to breathe, but neither spoke. Barbara asked why he wanted to see her that night. Paul answered with one short sentence. There was something she needed to know. His voice was tired and hoarse, like someone who had gone many days without real rest. They walked into a small diner where no one paid attention to them. Paul ordered a coffee. Barbara ordered nothing. She just watched him, waiting. Paul placed both hands on the table. He said someone had seen them. He did not know who. He did not know how much they knew. But he was sure things were no longer safe. Barbara felt her hands go cold. She looked around the diner as if someone might be watching. Paul put his hand on hers to calm her, but even he was shaking slightly. He told her one old letter he had written to her was no longer where he kept it. No one knew when it disappeared. Barbara thought of the small box she had hidden in her drawer. She had believed no one touched it. Now she was not so sure. They sat in silence for a few minutes. Paul said they had to be careful. But Barbara knew careful was just another way to avoid saying the real thing. They had to stop. She asked him directly if he wanted to end it. Paul did not answer right away. He looked down at the table. Then he said he did not want to lose her, but he could not let Joanne and the family's life collapse. His words felt like a cut, light but deep. Barbara nodded. She had always known this moment would come. She just did not expect it so soon. In the days that followed, Barbara tried to keep her distance. She did not answer Paul's messages. She did not pick up his calls. But he still found ways to reach her. A small note left on her makeup table. A call through the studio's internal line. A question passed through a mutual friend. All of it just to confirm she was okay. Barbara knew he worried. She worried about him too. But the longer it went on, the more dangerous everything became. One evening, Joanne found Paul sitting alone outside the house. It was cold. He was not wearing a coat. Joanne asked why he was out there. Paul just said he could not sleep. Joanne looked at him for a long moment. Something in him made her uneasy. She said he seemed like he was trying to hide something. Paul stayed silent. It was the kind of silence that made Joanne stand still for a few seconds before going back inside. And in that moment, Paul knew things could not continue much longer. The real shock came when a freelance reporter approached Barbara after a shoot. He seemed to know too much. He asked her direct, uncomfortable questions. Was she having a secret relationship with Paul Newman? Barbara froze. She forced herself to stay calm and said it was just a false rumor, but the look on his face told her he did not buy it. Barbara went home, closed her door, and sat alone for hours. She understood everything was slipping out of their control. Paul heard about it from a friend on set. He went to see Barbara that same night. She opened the door with red, tired eyes. Paul walked in and dropped into a chair like someone who had no strength left. He said they had no choice now. The only thing they could do was end it, starting that day. No more meeting, no more calls, no more silent moments that belonged only to them. Barbara listened to every word, feeling a weight pressing on her chest. She knew he was telling the truth, but the truth did nothing to ease the pain. She asked if he ever regretted it. Paul shook his head. He said he only regretted that she had to carry more of the burden than he did. That sentence made Barbara's eyes fill with tears. But she turned away so he would not see, because if he saw, he might stay. And if he stayed, they would never escape. The decision was made in silence. There was no hug, no promise, no beautiful goodbye like in films. Paul simply stood up. He looked at Barbara for a few seconds, as if memorizing her face one last time. Then he walked out. He did not look back. He did not say another word. Barbara stood still. The door closed softly, like a breath. Yet enough for her to know a piece of her life had just been torn away. The biggest shock was not that someone had found out, not the risk of scandal. The real shock was the moment they both understood that no matter how much they loved each other, they still could not choose each other. Paul returned to the role of the devoted husband Hollywood loved to praise. Barbara returned to the small room where she had taught herself to live, with silence years before. Each carried a piece of the truth, a piece no one was allowed to name. Time passed. Barbara kept working. Paul kept acting and doing charity. But every time she walked past the hallway where they used to talk, Barbara slowed her steps. Every time she saw his photo in a magazine, she looked a few seconds longer. Not because she was clinging to regret, but because she understood a simple fact. Some loves are not born to walk beside us. They are born to cross our path once and leave behind an empty space we cannot describe. Paul carried that space too. On nights when he sat alone under the kitchen light, that emptiness came back like a part of him. No one saw it. No one knew. No one understood. But it was there, a quiet reminder that some things never disappear, no matter how deep you bury them. And that was the real shock. The truth was not in how they loved each other, but in how they had to let each other go. Time helped things quiet down, but it did not erase what Paul and Barbara had lived through. Each went their own way. Both tried to move on, but the part of the story that belonged to them stayed somewhere behind. No one mentioned it. No one asked. Yet it lived in the small corners of memory they never dared to touch. Paul went back to family life. He once again appeared on the red carpet beside Joanne, smiled for the cameras, was once again held up as the perfect man. But those closest to him sometimes saw a tired look in his eyes. Paul never explained why. He stayed silent, the way every lifelong secret demands. Barbara was different. She returned to work. She stood in front of cameras every day, trying to keep her mind from drifting back to those quiet evenings with Paul. People around her saw a stronger woman, more grounded, but they did not know that strength was built from all the things she never had the chance to say. Both of them understood one thing very clearly. What they had was not a passing mistake. It was not a moment of weakness or a brief temptation. It arrived right when they were at their most fragile. It walked into their lives like both a shadow and a beam of light. And because of that, the cost was higher than anything they had imagined. Hollywood loves to tell beautiful stories. But the most beautiful part of Paul and Barbara's story is the part no one witnessed. It is the moment they chose to step back, to stay silent, to protect the people who never chose to be part of this pain. Keeping quiet is sometimes harder than speaking. Leaving is sometimes harder than staying. And loving in the dark can hurt far more than never loving at all. Paul went on building big things. He gave to charity. He built foundations. He helped communities. But behind all that light, there was a truth he never spoke. Even the best man has parts of his life that are not perfect, not because he is bad, but because he is human. Barbara lived with that truth longer than he did. She kept it as a private piece of her history, not bitter, not blaming, just a color she did not want anyone to touch. When she finally spoke at 87, her voice was still soft. She did not say Paul was wrong. She did not say she was right. She just told the story as if placing a final stone where it had always belonged. And maybe this is the last message their story leaves behind. No matter how carefully we try to protect a flawless image, the heart will always have weak spots no one can see. And sometimes, the things we hide the deepest are the ones that tell most clearly how honestly we have really lived.